Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tasty Trails Travel Pod. Today I'm joined by Breandán, an Irish writer and podcaster who has spent over a decade in Belgium exploring, studying, and savoring the incredible world of Belgian beer and food culture. We're chatting about what makes Belgian beer so special, how history, language, and even politics play into it, and of course, what beers and spots you definitely don't want to miss when you visit. Whether you're a seasoned beer enthusiast or just curious why Belgian beer is so world-renowned, you're going to love this episode. So, let's go. Hey, Breandán, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. Pretty excited to be here.
Thanks for being here. Can you tell us about who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Yes, so my name is Breandán. I, as you can tell from the accent, I'm Irish, but I've been living in Belgium for the last sort of 11 or 12 years now. I write about and podcast about Belgian beer and Belgian beer culture and Belgian food and Belgian food culture for my own platforms, but also for a bunch of international magazines and websites that people might know.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to talk to you today. What got you into Belgian beer, just kind of being there, or did you previously have a lot of interest in it before?
No, I drank beer when I was in Ireland, of course, and when I was there was definitely limited options for beer than there is now. I think Ireland has kind of changed a little bit, but it's effectively, everyone knows that Guinness is like 1 in every 3 pints in Ireland in terms of like beer consumed, and it's like a cultural heavyweight. So obviously I drank Guinness, and there were some like international European lagers that would obviously be popular as well. But no, when I came to Belgium, I didn't know very much about Belgian beer. And I went to some cafes, and they present you with a menu of a whole range of different styles, and you basically start to develop curiosity. And I guess the sort of throwing myself into beer culture let me fully explore the country a little bit and find out a bit more about my new home. So that was how I got into beer.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you're right. I'm from the States, and after uni, was very surprised to find that there was more than just like Bud Light, Coors Light, and that beer could actually like taste good. But obviously, the U.S. culture is still different than European and specifically Belgian. So yeah, I'm really excited to dive into Belgian beer because there's just so much. It's so vast, and it's got, it's really rich and diverse like culture. So what makes Belgian beer and Belgian beer culture different from other like beer consuming countries?
Yeah, good question. I think it is sort of remarkably different from other beer cultures. There's a few reasons for that. It's a very small country, actually. So if you look at like the neighboring countries of France and Germany and the UK, it has quite a small population. There's only 11.5 million people in Belgium. It's a geographical size, which is like half the size of the island of Ireland. I think if you were to compare it to an American state, Belgium would probably be the same size as Maryland. Is that a place? Maryland?
Yeah.
Which is a smaller state, right? Yeah, so Belgium's small, right?
Maryland's really small.
So what's actually fascinating is that within that small geographical space, you have a fairly densely packed population. You have some heavyweight cities with real sort of cultural offerings: Antwerp, Bruges, Ghent, Brussels, Hasselt, Liège, Namur. You have 3 language communities. So the 3 official languages of the country are Dutch or Flemish, variant of it, which is known as Flemish, French, and German. And then you have 3 kind of regional government authorities: Flanders, Wallonia, and Brussels capital region. And I guess the fact that it sits at the kind of the junction of like Gallic flair and Germanic sort of efficiency means that it's taken influences from all those different places, especially post World War One, when they would have an influx of English soldiers coming and fighting. And then again in World War II, there was they brought their beer with them. You have Germany right next door, which is like incredible engineering, new, very big for lager culture. And then to the west, you have France, of course, who age an acidic beverage called wine in wooden barrels. So all of those things kind of gave it a slightly different evolution, I guess, than other countries. And I think that was also exacerbated by the fact that Belgians, by their kind of nature, are quite a pragmatic people, which again is a personality trait that's been developed over hundreds of years of being shit on by other nations. I don't know if I can
Yeah.
curse on this podcast, but I'm just going to
Yeah,
go
yeah, yeah,
for it
absolutely.
anyway. So you had the Portuguese, you had the Spanish, you had the Germans, the French, the Austrians. So everyone's had their go, and Belgium is, in a way, it's like a European sort of handshake of a creation to kind of appease the power nations at one point, a fairly young country. So you have this sort of strange makeup, which has, given us a kind of a very strange beer culture, which is heavily regionalized. So basically, where other countries, the regional styles, kind of our regional traditions were like swept away quite quickly by either big commercial players or just by globalization generally over the last century. I think it's been slower to change in Belgium. And therefore, you have the most diverse range of like indigenous styles in contemporary beer today, right? So you have like, and they're the most different types of beers. I think the other thing that sets it apart is that it's quite well known for its fermentation forward flavors. So these are beers which are big on like ester compounds, so very fruity, whether that's ranging from like apricot and peach to banana sort of in the triple side, or if it goes to more like citrus, tangerine, lemon ester profiles, or very phenolic beers, so people think also very spicy beers, like they get that pepper, that clove quality to them. But there's a whole other range of fermentation flavors. If you go looking at saison, if you go looking at lambic, these styles, these some of them are either wild or hybrid or spontaneously fermented, and you have a lot of influence from the bacteria and wild yeast that's in the ambient area of the brewery and of production. So yeah, influence from other countries, widest diversity of beer styles of any other country, in a very small space, which has maintained its regional sort of traditions, pragmatism of the people, and a fermentation forward flavor profile that other countries don't have, make it a very interesting place. And I guess the crown on that point would be that Belgium is the only country in the world whose beer culture is recognized by UNESCO as part of the intangible heritage culture of the world. So that's something I think that other countries are trying to do. I know that UK have a campaign going at the minute to try and have their cask ale heritage recognised, and the Germans obviously are trying with the lager culture, but Belgium is the only one at the minute that has that recognised by UNESCO. So yes, rich and diverse, as you said.
Yeah, I saw that when I was doing a little bit of research, and that's absolutely incredible to have the UNESCO. That's so cool. Do you think that the reason that it's more been able to keep its more regional ness is because of kind of the distinct regions in Belgium? I mean, I know there's different regions in all of the countries, but because there's the even like the language difference and things like that, that's been helpful in it, or kind of why do you think it's been slower
Yeah,
than everybody
there's
else?
I think there's a localism that comes with being a country that's as divided as Belgium is. So, for example, if you live 30 minutes away but you speak a completely different language to me, it's going to be harder for us to transfer those cultural things more quickly. It will happen, of course, but language is a big thing. And even where people are speaking Dutch or Flemish, the regional dialects are so different that a lot of the times they can't understand each other. So what you have on national
Ah, okay.
Belgian television is, and this is generally for either extremely rural places or for older generations, but when someone from a region speaks in Flemish, they'll put up subtitles in
Oh,
Algemene
wow.
Nederlands, which is like general, so that people on the other side of the country can understand them, which I think is
Wow.
absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Um, it would be like someone from California getting subtitles so that someone in New York could understand them, and that shows you how different the dialects are.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's even like someone from Los Angeles getting subtitles for someone from San Francisco.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not even that far away. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. So that's something that's actually on the national television station VRT. I think it's less the case with French, although there are differences between French and Walloon French. And then they have a German speaking part, which is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. So yeah, I wanted to kind of get into some of the styles. So I think people have probably heard of like the saisons, and I'm familiar with lambics, but not a lot. And I see things like the doubles and the triples, but I guess I didn't realize that those were kind of under this umbrella of Trappist beers. Can you talk about, or and if that's accurate, can you talk about that?
Yeah, okay, good. That's it. Okay, so to clarify, not all triples and doubles are Trappist. Okay, that's the first thing to
Oh,
say.
okay, okay, okay.
So what you're referring to there is a group of styles which are generally described as Abbey styles, right? Trappist is a very particular label that you have to fulfill certain rules to have. So, of course, you do have some triples which are Trappist, but you have the majority of triples in Belgium are not Trappist. So
Oh,
basically, there are
okay, okay,
five
okay.
Trappist breweries in Belgium. There are two in Flanders and three in Wallonia. The ones in Wallonia are Orval, Chimay, and Rochefort, and the ones in Flanders are Westmalle and West-Vleteren. And up until 2 or 3 years ago, there was a third called Achel, which is now no longer run by the religious community and is now owned by like a private commercial investor who runs that as a brewery. And in order for a beer to qualify as an authentic Trappist product, it must fulfill three rules. One is that the beer is produced within the walls of a Cistercian monastery. Two, the beer must be produced under the full supervision of the monks. And three, the proceeds from the beer must go to the charitable causes as decided by the monastery. So what you'll find, of course, is that
Oh,
those Trappist beers are all within inside these monasteries. But of course, there are hundreds of triples which are not Trappist, which are produced by commercial breweries that don't fulfill those rules. So that's the first thing to say. The other thing to note about Trappist is that it's not a style. So you have amber ales with wild yeast of 6.2% ABV, which are Trappist, but you also have blonde, sort of, banana-y, oaty triples of 9.5%, which are also Trappist beers. You also have dark, strong beers with like fermentation flavors of like raisin and dried plum and stuff, which are 11.3%, which are also Trappist beers. So it doesn't really refer to the style of beer. There has been a traditional perception that they fall into certain styles, but that has been challenged by other international Trappist breweries, because it's not just a Belgian thing, who have produced Trappist beers with eucalyptus and Trappist IPAs and Trappist English ales. So while I would say personally, just from experience, that the quality of the beers coming from the Belgian Trappist is probably higher than those across the world, and I don't think anybody that understands beer would challenge me on that. A lot of them actually go to the Belgians for quality control and for advice and for help with setup of systems and equipment, because they've been doing it for so long. It's not a uniquely Belgian thing. I guess the last thing to say about Trappist is that it's not just beer. So an authentic Trappist product is a
oh,
logo that you get, which is certified. And the other big, I mean, there are many, but the big other one that people refer to or know about is cheese. So if the cheese is produced within the walls of a Cistercian monastery under the supervision of monks, with the proceeds going to the charities decided by the monks, and that could be to fix the roof in the monastery or some other community initiative, then it's also a Trappist cheese, right? So yeah, that's yeah, there's a lot of misperceptions about it, but
okay, yeah, yeah.
it's quite simple. That's kind of the religious branding, and there's another certification called Erkend op die Stijlbieren, which is about recognized abbey beers, which are not brewed in a monastery, but which involve a kind of a commercial license between a commercial brewery and a monastery. And that monastery doesn't even have to, like, it could be like just a ruin of a monastery. And that's a whole other complicated thing. And there's been court cases where people have gone to court to say, I thought this was produced in a monastery, but actually it's just a pile of rubble outside a city in Belgium,
Oh,
and the license has been paid for by the archaeological group who owns the rubble and the name of the old monastery that now doesn't exist. So it gets very complicated. Religious branding, I think, has been extremely lucrative. So I guess it's extremely interesting, and people should just be careful about what they're drinking, because
people just
yeah,
want that just because of like the history or something that comes with it. They're like, oh, it's like cooler or better if we've got this that kind of branding.
yeah. So I think if
Mm.
you see the Erkend up the beer, the recognized Abbey beer, you know that it's from a brewery that's got a relationship with a Abbey. If you see that it's got the Trappist logo, then it's definitely supervised by monks. And then, of course, all the other breweries that make Abbey styles try to, piggyback and put some iconography related to monasteries or saints or whatever on their beers. So they have a better chance in the market of creating those emotive feelings among the consumers.
And as far as like quantity, I mean, is it easy to get a Trappist beer, or like I imagine just the space and time of the monks and stuff isn't obviously anywhere near the capacity of something commercial. So how common or easy is it to get a Trappist beer?
There are smaller Trappist breweries and bigger Trappist breweries. So of course the smaller ones it's more difficult. There's a very famous small Trappist brewery called West Vleteren, who I think back in 2012, 13 were named by a website called Rate Beer as the best beer in the world based on ratings of users. And there was a international media scrum on the brewery at that time, as well as massive demand from Belgium and other international markets that the brewery couldn't sustain. And it kind of took them by surprise because it was just a small group of monks making beer in a fairly basic way. Then there are bigger Trappist breweries. For example, Chimay would be one of the more commercial of the breweries, and Chimay would obviously export their beers quite a lot, but they would have some lay people that aren't monks working in commercial distribution for them, marketing maybe. But I mean, they're nowhere on the level of like an Anheuser-Busch InBev or a Heineken or some of these companies which have, massive facilities and massive distribution. It's a whole other stratosphere.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Okay, so now actual styles of Belgian beer then. So what are some uniquely Belgian style beers?
Well, I think if you start with the Abbey ones, I think it's quite a seductive style for people that maybe have never been to Belgium or that are looking to experiment, because generally they're higher in alcohol. They have fermentation forward flavors, so they've got big yeast flavors, whether it's spicy or fruity or that type of thing. They're very malty, very full bodied, and they're very luscious beers and very intense. Can be quite intense beers. So I mean, that's the thing that I was drawn to when I first arrived, because it was so different to what I experienced before. So that's kind of the doubles and the triples, and those are kind of basically terms which denote the historical amount of raw ingredients that went into the beer. So triple would have had, triple the amount of grains, for example, that would have gone into the normal monk's beer, and a double would have doubled the amount. And it just so happened that, they evolved in modern ways, that the double kind of is generally dark and the triple is generally blonde. And then there's a Belgian dark strong ale, sometimes known as the quadruple, which is, it's higher again, but it's also dark. So that's the kind of the Abbey styles. Then you have the inverted commas farmhouse styles, which are the sort of the story goes that they generally are from Henegouwen, which is the region in the French-speaking southwest of the country, and that is a beer that would have been basically for people who worked on the farm during the summer to keep them in jobs in the winter, basically to work in the brewery part of the farm. Would have been using things that were at hand, so raw oats, raw wheat, obviously barley malted, and generally a mixed fermentation with whatever yeast was on the farm as well. So those beers have evolved quite a lot in terms of like the modern saisons are a little bit cleaner, but the kind of the story behind them is quite romantic, which I think draws a lot of people to them. Because of the nature of fermentation, they're very dry beers, so they're really good with food. They're really good for thirst quenching. They're really good in the summer, and they're also kind of fruit forward because of that expressive yeast. Then you've got the Old Brown, and I think largely because of like BJCP and the Americans, like Americans are very drawn to putting things in boxes and having labels and categories for things. So they've like tried to differentiate Old Brown, which is like basically a mixed fermentation beer with an acidic flavor profile. And they put it into one box, which is like Flanders Brown or Old Brown, which is a stainless steel fermented, usually around Oudenaarde, and the Flanders Red, which is the wood aged beer. But actually, when you go to all the breweries around here and you examine the history and you talk to what they're doing now, there is actually no difference, and everyone here on the ground calls it Old Brown as one style. And there's a whole mix match of how they're fermenting it, what they're using in terms of wood and stainless steel. But that's kind of, I guess it's quite a vinous beer, an interesting one for people that are into big sweet red wines like Burgundies. There's actually one beer called Duchesse de Bourgogne, which is a famous beer here. It's quite acidic and vinegary in its nature. The classic poster boy of the style would be Rodenbach, which is a big brand that I think also is exported to the States. but that's another style which is also very interesting. And 5.5% regionally would have been one of the locals' favorites. Lambic is another one that's a spontaneously fermented one. So that's the kind of the most crazy, most hard to produce. It takes 3 years. You need blends of 1, 2,
Oh,
3 years
whoa.
to make. Yeah, you don't add any yeast, so you basically make a turbid mash of very thick wheat beer, and you allow whatever organisms are in the air. So you can't do it when it's too warm because you'll attract too much acetic acid bacteria, which turns into vinegar. So you have to do it in certain months of the year. Then you put that in wooden barrels for a very slow fermentation, and you develop all these interesting flavors, which are extremely complex and kind of lend themselves to aging in the bottle. But we could talk for an hour about lambic if you want, but I don't know if
Yeah.
that's what you want. I mean, then you have things like Special Belge, which is an interesting story because it came at a time when there was a lot of influx from English beers and German beers, and this is kind of post-war time when the Belgians were like, hey, we need to almost invent a new style, and they had this big competition, and it was basically like an amber ale with a fermentation flavor profile kind of in line with that of the English beers. So it kind of developed into this like amber ale that probably the most famous version of it now would be the one that's in Antwerp, the Bolleke, which is from the Koning, now owned by Duvel Morkat. That's a sort of a less sexy style today, but it's got quite an interesting history in terms of how the Belgians viewed themselves and how the brewers collaborated at a certain point. And then, of course, you have what I would call international styles like Stout and IPA, which are kind of, Stout's always been around and the Belgians have always had their version of it. IPA and some of the more modern styles are kind of, trying to push in, but it's developed into something slightly different, not the way that the Americans or even the Northern Europeans make them. So yeah, there's plenty on the table. And then of course lager. So even though the specialty beer market, inverted commas, is like bigger than every other country in terms of, family brewers and some of those specialty styles, still the most consumed beer like style in Belgium is like pills or European pills. So of course
Oh, okay.
you have a lot of local and regional family brewers making those, as well as obviously the big players who own a lot of property, cafes, and control distribution. So there's lots to try.
Yeah, there's there's so many. And going back to like the double and triple, which you talked at the beginning, singles are pretty rare or not a thing at all.
So they were kind of pretty rare. They're sometimes called enkel, which is the Flemish word for single. Most commonly, they're known as pater, Pater, which is like the pater, the monk's beer, because that was a lower alcohol version, this sort of small beer for them to drink, at a time when it would have been healthier to drink beer than water, given it was a disinfected beer. But that kind of really stayed in the monastery, and I guess the other styles became sort of more commercially interesting. But now that we have, I guess, a more health conscious move to lower and lower alcohol products, and also I think people are just drinking less. Some of those breweries have resurrected their pater beers on the commercial market where they weren't available before. So like I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Westmalle, which is one of the Trappist breweries, brought out Westmalle Extra, which was their pater beer effectively. And I know that other family brewers who do Abbey styles also have brought in these, like St. Bernardus also have their pater version of their beer. So those are kind of becoming more interesting now, I think.
Okay, yeah, that is really interesting. And like you said at the beginning, you talked a lot about food, and I've listened to a few of your podcast episodes on food, the fries and the mayonnaise. And I know just because it's so vast, and like we just talked about, there's so many different styles. But in general, if you can, are there some classic like Belgian beer and food pairings?
Absolutely, there sure are. I mean, one of them is a beer we haven't even mentioned yet, which is the wit beer, like a wheat beer. So this
Mhm.
is a beer which is, I guess, most famous commercially because of a beer called Hoegaarden, which I think also would be pretty popular in the States,
Mhm.
which is kind of a different beer to the way that it originated in Belgium. But that was a beer that was kind of that was a regional beer around Leuven and Vlaams Brabant. It was going out of style. and a guy kind of resurrected it in the 60s and turned it into something that was quite interesting. So it's a kind of a wheat beer with a very cloudy appearance, a very tangy flavor profile. It's spiced with orange peel and cinnamon, so coriander, sorry. So, but that's usually paired with white fish. So it's kind of soft and delicate enough with the kind of citrus aspect and a little bit of spiciness from the coriander that it kind of is often paired with fish. So that's a very common one. Another would be eau de crique, which is another thing we haven't mentioned yet, which is fruit beers. So crique is a type of sour cherry, and it's very common in using with especially with the lambic beers. So if you have a huzu, which is a blended mix of these old and young lambics, a lot of the times the breweries will then do a version which has been macerated on like these sour cherries, krieken. So that beer is often paired with like dark chocolate desserts and dark chocolate dishes,
Oh, yum.
because it's kind of there are sweet versions of it, but the traditional versions are quite tart and extremely like heavy on the jamminess of the cherry and the sort of the stone fruitiness of the cherry. And then another classic one would be the dark strong ales, like the doubles and the quadruples with like meat stews. And often they're used not only to pair but to cook. So they'll basically use the beer as the main part of the sauce. So the common one, like the Stoveré, the Garbon Flamand in French, and the Vlaamse Stoveré in Dutch, is when you basically just put meat in beer, you add bread and mustard, and then that's your stew. That's kind of how they make it. So those are some of the more common pairings.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Those all sound really like comforting together. And day to day, what's a typical Belgian's relationship with beer? Are they drinking beer at lunch, having beer at dinner every day?
Yeah, I think it's kind of just an accepted part of culture. I mean, it's changing slowly now with I think more of an awareness of health and alcohol, but it's something that is an accepted part of Belgian culture. There's cafes in every town and every village, and that's also still a major social hub for people, and that's where people go at the weekend or after work. I think there's a lot of pride in their culture, but day to day, I think it's probably a lot more relaxed than maybe other countries, like in the US, for example, in that they would have a beer at lunchtime, and it wouldn't be such a big deal to have beer at like kids events and that type of thing. So I think they're trying to protect their cafe culture as much as possible in sort of changing times, post COVID, remote working, all that sort of stuff has having an impact. But yeah, it's a close relationship as sort of denoted by the UNESCO recognition as well, which had a big part of the application was all about cafes and how deeply intertwined it was with local communities.
Yeah, so you can kind of show up. It doesn't. You don't have to go to like a specific, like a brewery or like anything. Like you can kind of go to the place around the corner, and you're going to find a selection of really, really nice, good beers, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, all cafes will have a menu, and all village festivals, or even in the night shop, you'll get something half decent. If you go to the small corner shops, a lot of it is sort of from the bigger commercial players that can get into a lot of those places. But that's why it becomes interesting to hunt out some of the better cafes that are kind of run by people that know what they're doing.
Yeah, well, that actually leads me into my next question. So, I mean, Delirium is a very famous spot and a little bit cliche or whatever, but do you have any recommendations on places to go besides there that are great for when people are visiting or
Yeah, I mean, Delirium is quite a touristy establishment. Let's put it that
yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah.
I guess it depends on what you want because there are like so many what I call like bruine kroeg, like brown cafes, which are like the old school cafes with all the paraphernalia and the photographs and the games and the little wooden lock boxes and stuff. Like, there's plenty of those where maybe the beer selection isn't so vast, but the beer experience is just so worth it and it's so like tied in
Yeah,
with like
yeah.
the history of drinking in Belgium. Then you have more independent cafes where they really pride themselves on excellent curation and selection and they work with great distributors. So they're getting some, great beers in from really interesting producers. That's more like what I would call like a beer bar. And then you have something more modern again, which is, I guess, a little bit interesting for like the beers that you can get, but it's maybe it has a little bit less soul in terms of like it's more similar to international bars where where they have the white walls and the kind of the minimalist decor. But I mean, there are there are so many of those types of bars in Brussels and Ghent and Antwerp and all over the place. I mean, what's also interesting to do is to go and try beer at breweries because, if you go to Brussels, you can go to l'Hermitage, you can go to Brasserie de la Seine, you can go to Brasserie de la Mule in Schaerbeek. They all have their own tap rooms and their own bars. And, you can try the beers at source. And I think that's quite interesting as well to maybe ask where we should be going and find out about, some of the things if people are interested in beer, what they should be doing in those cities. And yeah, so I think brewery visits are good, and then some of the older bars.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, those are great suggestions. Do you have a favorite, either style or particular beer?
I don't really, because I kind of it's changing all the time and I'm moving around. I think in terms of like working on stories, I think lambic is probably the most interesting because it's based around the area sort of southwest of Brussels, and there's maybe about, I don't know, like 15 producers, so it's a small world, but it's such a difficult beer to produce and one that basically you have to give your life to, because if one bottle takes 3 years, maybe more, it has to be sort of a lifelong a project. Because of that, the people that are attracted to it are, how do I put this diplomatically, interesting characters.
Okay.
You have a lot of ego, you have a lot of strong-willed characters, and I think you have to do it your way if you're going to make something like that, because it's a lot of really hard work. It's a difficult market, but it's also
Yeah,
very
for sure.
special, and it's unlike anything else. Like the flavor of lambic is, there's absolutely no other beer in the world that compares to it. So yeah, I mean, you have to source barrels from French wine producers from all over the world. You have to make sure that the barrels are in good condition. You have to understand what blending is, what the components of blending are, and you have to also be patient, because something that might not be aromatically or flavor wise in the right place now might be wonderful in 6 months or 9 months. And it's a very natural process, so you kind of don't have that much control. As you can try to control as much of it as you can. So it's yeah, a lot of quite interesting people and really interesting beers, which are extremely complex.
Okay, yeah, that's so cool. And what about like in the course of doing your podcast, was there some super unexpected things or like crazy things that either have happened or that you discovered along the way?
Um, it's kind of like, I think there's this romance about Belgian beer where people hold it up on a pedestal, and there's like magic yeast and like secret recipes and 10 generations of all this kind of secrecy. And I think when I started to like learn the language a little bit and study production a little bit, and I would go to places not as a kind of a drop in from another country, but as like someone who lives here and like kind of knows beer and beer production a little bit, they kind of talk a little bit more honestly to you, and you find out that a lot of the stories behind the beers are not as maybe as magical or as concocted as they seem to be. And there's a grittiness and a kind of like that pragmatism I was talking about earlier in the Belgian beer world, which can also create beautiful things. And I think what I came to realize from talking to a lot of people and driving around for the last 12 years is that there's actually a lot of romance in the kind of pragmatic decisions that the Belgian brewers take, to do these things, like over the course of 5 years, the things that you do, the things that you sacrifice, the changes that you made to what was a traditional thing to do to produce something is actually, that's kind of, for me, is the romance of Belgian beer a little bit, in that sort of the grittiness and the hard work and the practical decisions. And then you come up with this thing that's like no other country could do, I think. And there are other countries that are making excellent Belgian style beers, whether it's Abbey Styles or Lambic, whatever, but there's still, sometimes I have visitors come over who are brewers in another country, and I would take them, for a tour, and it's a hard job because you're inside, production facility in London or in New York or in Portland, and it's like, you maybe don't get that much time to reflect on the things that brought you into the industry in the first place. But when they come to Belgium, even the most jaded of people who have been in beer for a long time, I see their faces just light up and how impressed they are with the beers and the beer culture. And that gives me stops me from being jaded, because I see, oh yeah, of course, I mean, I'm in it every day and it can wear you down, but actually it's wonderful. And I think that's what makes it so interesting.
That's really nice. It's really nice that everybody else is kind of able to see that it sounds like just kind of goes to the core of the production and the culture and everything. Do you feel like your experience just as a beer drinker has changed a lot? I mean, obviously, I guess just living in Belgium in general does change it, but having learned what you learned through the podcast and your work and stuff, do you feel like your experience just as a beer enjoyer has changed?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think I drink a lot less for pleasure, because I drink for work, and when I drink for pleasure, I don't want to be disappointed. Or I kind of know what I am looking for. I think I've become more cynical about what people in production say and also what people in marketing say, but I also have come to respect people that maybe I wouldn't have thought were so exciting a few years ago, but now, because I've been in the world, I'm drawn to like the simple things that work really well, even if they're maybe not the hype or the trend at the minute. So yeah, I've definitely changed, and I probably will change further. But you know, it's also like any food, like any cultural phenomenon. It's a way to talk to people about their lives and what makes them tick. And it's, I guess, more and more the podcast and the Belgian Smaak side is also about the things that we share as people, not just like the things that make Belgian beer special. So in that way, that also keeps me interested.
Yeah, that's really, really nice. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for coming on. There's one question that I like to ask everybody, and that is, what would your last meal be?
My last meal? Oh, Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Can it be a dessert?
Oh, yeah, of course. Anything you want.
I mean, I'm going to die, so I don't need to worry about calories or sugar, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
I quite like, my wife makes like a homemade apple crumble. That's quite good,
Oh,
with a cup of black Irish tea and a drop of fresh cow's milk in there. So,
oh,
like, I don't know if you know the phenomenon around Irish tea, but it's like, you know,
I
it's
don't.
it's like anytime you go into someone's house in Ireland, you're offered to put on a pot of tea and you get a cup of tea. When I came to Belgium, everyone was like, yeah, tea. And then they give you all the herbal options and the mint and everything. It's like, no, just black tea with a wee drop of milk beside a nice cake or a bit of crumble or something. So that's a very comforting, homely, delicious, sweet dessert.
Oh, I love that. That is really good. And that is very, very comforting. That's awesome. When you go back to Ireland, or do you drink Guinness, or you try to find Belgian beer, or does not matter?
I mean, I have Belgian beer here, so when I go home, I don't drink Belgian beer. It's not that easy to find in Ireland. I'll drink Guinness sometimes, but I'll also try beers from other breweries that maybe I don't know. I'm always sort of curious and on the lookout and interested to see, you know, who's making what locally or in different cities. So I'm definitely curious when I go home.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, can you tell everybody how to find you, connect with you, listen to your podcast?
Yeah, so the podcast is available on all the normal places, Spotify and Apple. All the handles are the same, Belgian Smaak. So Belgian in English, Smaak is the Flemish word for taste with two A's, Smaak. So I think that's on Insta and yeah, all the usual platforms.
Awesome. And then I'll make sure to link everything in the description as well, to make it easy for people to click on. But yeah, thank you so much for hanging out today. This is like super, super interesting. And now I got to go get a beer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
If you want to hear more from Breandán, check out his podcast, Belgian Smaak, which I highly recommend. All the links are in the show notes, so you can find him super easily. And if this episode got you craving a lambic, a triple, or even just a cozy cafe somewhere in Belgium, you are not alone. Belgium has a lot to offer, jam-packed into such a small area. It's a really, really great country. Make sure to send this to a fellow beer lover. And if you haven't already, please leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It really, really helps us out, and we really, really appreciate it. Until next week. Bye. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter for exclusive travel tips, recipes, and insider info on all the destinations that we cover. Sign up using the link in the show notes or on the website to keep exploring the world together. See you next time. Bye.